All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are here today for a 1-hour session. We are joined by two really great panelists that we're excited to introduce you to in just a moment here. But before we do, just some quick housekeeping. The chat and the question and answer feature will be open throughout our entire session. So if you have questions throughout that you'd like for us to address at the end, please feel free to use that feature at any point during the presentation today. You don't have to wait till the end to do that. I will be moderating that throughout our time here. The session is also recorded and you will be getting a link to this recording as well. So whether you'd like to watch it back or share with colleagues, you are welcome to do that. We will share that link with you on Monday. Without further ado, the two MPI team members here. So my name is Rachel. I'm the community manager at MPI. I've been with the team for just over 3 years. I'm joined by my colleague, Bruce Parsons. And we are happy to have two amazing guests today, Jeff Hall of Kitware and Jody Vilkins of Healthy Alliance. So Jeff, would you like to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Hall. I'm the director of HR at a company called Kitware, which is a local company founded in the area. Currently, our headquarters are in Clifton Park, but we have employees and offices across the U.S. And we're a software development company. We do a lot of work with federal government agencies and also commercial agencies to develop visualization and computer vision software. My background, I've been in HR for a little over 20 years now, and HR management roles for about 10 of those years. And in my role, in my career, I usually focus on aspects of HR such as talent acquisition, compensation, benefits, employee experience, the typical stuff. Happy to be here and talk about some good strategic issues that have come up in HR and connecting it to the businesses that we work for.
Thank you, Jeff. How about you, Jody?
Hey, everybody. My name is Jody. I've recently joined Healthy Alliance as their VP of HR. Healthy Alliance is an organization based in the Albany region of New York, and through a network, we help to bring services into communities of need and to help promote health in those communities. So a great organization. My background is pretty varied in HR. I think like most people, I fell into HR. I was a teacher for a couple of years and realized, not for me. So I appreciate every teacher out there because it's a hard job. And then fell into HR and I've been doing it ever since. And I've done everything from talent acquisition to employee relations, talent management, pretty much everything, not as much the benefits, but everything else. And it's really been fantastic. So happy to be here and excited to talk with all of you.
We're excited to have you both.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Bruce Parsons from MPI, and we'd like to thank again Jeff and Jody for joining us and Rachel for steering this conversation today. For anyone who isn't familiar with MPI, we are a consultancy based in Albany, New York, serving the greater capital region and really all over the country now that we can do things remotely. And we exist to help the leaders we serve to improve their confidence and competence so they and their businesses can thrive. We largely do that through the core pillars of strategy, culture, and leadership development. And we're very happy to be hosting this webinar today. But we chose this topic for today because we've been hearing a lot about this in the last 6 months, especially from our customers and in the general, business community. It's been brought up a lot, and we want all of you to get a chance to hear from more than just MPI, and that's why we've invited Jeff and Jody to join us. And it's really to talk about, HR leaders being more powerful and impactful business partners in addition to their traditional HR roles and responsibilities. So with that, let me just share some of the current state situation out there, kind of why we did this. But what we're going to do is we're going to set the scene a little bit first and with the current state situation, then we're going to have a conversation with our panelists. And as Rachel said, we're hoping to have about 15 minutes at the end for questions to answer your questions. And as Rachel said, please feel free to put those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end. So that's kind of the flow of today. So this really resonated with me recently. We did a workshop on this with our HR executive peer group. And this notion came from the book Talent Wins. And every business has two primary resources from which it can work, and it's people and money. And money has always been given very serious strategic and disciplined oversight by businesses. We report on financial situation every month, every quarter, every year. But what we're starting to see is more emphasis on spending just as much time analyzing and strategically deciding and monitoring our people's situation. And more and more companies are looking at becoming people first organizations. And that's going to be woven into what we're talking about today. It's very important to think of that context. So some other current state information. The information you see on the screen right now came from a survey that was done by SHRM. It's called the State of the Workplace Study, done in the late 2022. And what you see are our top 5 organizational priorities for 2023 based on what hundreds of organizations said. And you can see, no big surprises here, but number 1, maintaining employee morale and engagement, then retaining top talent, finding and recruiting talent with the necessary skills, developing more effective leaders and people managers, and performing fair and competitive compensation evaluations and adjustments. So, conducting these, successfully requires a people-focused strategic approach. And very often HR leaders struggle with finding time to be strategic. So to address these 5 concerns, we're going to have to find the time and the capacity to do just, to work on those things. But the real world is there's some big barriers to making those things happen. In the same study, we found that some of the biggest barriers to achieving those priorities are lack of budget or perceived lack of budget. 48% said that. Limited time or dedicated personnel, 42%. Senior leadership support or buy-in, 41%. And current organizational cultural norms aren't real consistent with that strategic approach. So that's what we're facing in the current state situation. And we wanted to address that in today's webinar. So with that, let's get right into it. So just to share a little bit more about Jeff as we get into it, I'm going to ask Jeff a question here. He's going to respond to it. And we're going to, hear his response. But as Jeff noted, he's been in HR for leadership for 10 years and HR generally for 22. And I want to brag a little bit about Kitware. They've been a best place to work for 3 years in a row now, and they're very proud of that. They have a very people first culture. I know that because we've been working with them on some engagements. And they have offices in Clifton Park, North Carolina, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Arlington, Virginia, Minneapolis, and Lyon, France. And they have, a bunch of remote employees as well. So what I'd like to do is have Jeff dive into this first question. So Jeff, how have you chosen to deliver extraordinary value to your executive team at Kitware as its top HR officer? And what 1 or 2 things are most important to you to bring to the leadership table that enhances your contributions to your business improvement impact?
Yeah, I think overall, it's important to bring a degree of HR knowledge, a high degree of HR knowledge and expertise to the leadership discussions that you're a part of, right? Or that you're able to at least influence. And bring the knowledge that enhances the discussion and decision making that's taking place at the leadership table and and other discussions that happen within the company. So for me, for example, I try to just, simply stay up to date on things and collate that information. Specifically, I mean, things like what are the external labor market trends for your workforce? What new laws and regulations are coming, down the pipe that, could influence what your company is doing? And combining that with internal information, right? So engagement data, turnover, time to hire, what are your training and development needs look like? When you paint that picture, you're able to, positively and accurately affect your leadership team's viewpoints and their outlook on, the reality of the business environment that they're operating within. So you need to be able to articulate that, right? And know when to, pull out that information depending on what's being discussed. Doing so, I think, enriches HR's contribution to the bottom line, your company's success. And when I say bottom line, I use that kind of loosely. I mean, this can apply to, for-profit or nonprofit organizations. But the philosophy that I try to bring to HR is to treat it like any other profession, right? I mean, you think about the other teams that you work with at your company, operations and finance and so forth, they're no different, right? And we're no different than them in how to approach, what we do, especially at a higher strategic level. And what I mean by that is those professions and HR in the same way needs to combine that, hard data that I was referring to, fuzzy data, if you will. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. You have to bring a degree of your experience and judgment and past experiences to interpret those numbers and turn those into recommendations and insights, right? So when we're, for example, working on our periodic strategic planning, what comes to bear on that strategic plan from an HR perspective? And again, it could be things like, if they're planning to expand into new areas or new business lines, that has a very heavy HR component to that, so do we have the internal skill sets and knowledge to be able to deliver what we're trying to do as a business? And if not, what do we do about that? Do we talk about training? Do we talk about talent acquisition and bringing that to bear? So, one way that I try to summarize these things is, you at most businesses, excuse me, and ours is no exception, you have a business strategic plan, right? That projects into the future what you want to accomplish and how you want to grow and all that stuff. I think it's a good idea to take that and create an HR strategic plan that links back to the main one, right? So what is your team, your people going to do that directly ties back to whatever bottom line objective that the business has? So in other words, I think it's easy to, for people to view HR as kind of the soft skills people, right? And that's an important component, of course, is the human interaction and employee relations and things like that. But being able to also bring a degree of rigor and data analysis, especially at a company like mine that's run by a bunch of engineers. I mean, that's what they respond to, right? Is show me the data, show me the conclusions, show me the trends, and your interpretation of those. And that's what I feel is important to, have and keep that seat at the table, is to speak in the same language that the other people at the table speak.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. So a follow-up to that is, can you provide us a recent example when you brought your complete business partner value to the executive team at Kitware, like an example of, maybe being more than what traditional HR is and really serving as a executive business partner for your executive team?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm trying to, and it's always gets kind of gray in the middle, right? Between, what is more functional or tactical stuff versus what is more longer term and strategic stuff. So when I think of that question, I think about what's beyond the day-to-day execution of stuff and more to the longer term structure and process that can be developed and implemented to help the business. And one example of that is, for us, is that we have what we call a career rubric, which is, long story short, it's basically a table that has positions, has competencies, and has definitions of what those competencies mean and can be evaluated to at the different levels, right? And we use it for a lot of decision-making aspects, such as, somebody ready for promotion. It's referred to when we do our appraisals, or if, unfortunately there are performance issues. That's how we tie it back to, having as best we can quantitative with some qualitative stuff too, to be able to evaluate on. And, so over the last, few months or so, we've been working to update that. And I think it's a great example of HR being able to be at the, nexus of different aspects of what the business is doing. So, and especially in the people management. So, taking the concerns of employees with the existing rubric, taking external, competitive data that we can get our hands on in terms of, what different similar positions are defined as and qualifications of those, and making that balance. So, for example, we want to have a structure where people feel like they're being promoted at a pace that works for them, but without tipping into fast tracking people and setting them up to fail, right? And also making sure we're not ending up too top heavy, where too many people running the show and not enough people actually doing the day-to-day work. So all of that comes together, and I think is an example of what I was speaking to before of, being the expert on the internal factors. What does your exit data say of why people are leaving? Does that come back to that tool? Do managers feel comfortable using the tool? Is it defined well enough? And, is it something that ultimately, if used the way we intend it to use, again, ties back to the strategic, plan that we have to have the right people in the right place at the right time to do what we need. So it's a great, topic to keep bringing up, because so many other things feed into it. Everything from talent acquisition to appraisals to promotions to, just our overall workforce makeup.
Well, thank you. So, Jody, any thoughts on Jeff's comments before we ask you the same question?
I think they're all right on. I really love the metric piece that you talk about, and providing that data. How have you found your executive team responds to some of the data? Do they look for certain things from you? Like, do they say we want to focus on this, or do they rely on you to say these are the things that are best for you to kind of monitor in the organization?
Yeah, I think, in terms of executive team input into the data, I mean, it comes from a couple different directions, right? What should we be looking at? And then how are we going to interpret the numbers that we do have? And from my experience, it's been kind of a progression in trust, right? In other words, when I first got to where I am in my position, there was a lot more input, right, from the executive team, because obviously they knew the business, better than I did. So it's a lot of iterative work, right, in terms of what we should be looking at and how it should be interpreted. And I think over the years, I've been with Kitware 6+ years now, we've gotten to a good place where it becomes more, turnkey, right? Where, yes, here are the reports that we've all kind of iterated on so many times, over the years to, make sure we're looking at the right things and interpreting it the right way. But the nice thing about our executive team, and I think our company in general, is we're on the smaller side. We're under 200 employees. So the leadership team that we have is also able to speak to a lot of day-to-day employee feedback, or things that they're not isolated from, because there's 5 layers from the engineers that are coming in the door. So having different teams that do different things and have different perspectives, put in their 2 cents at these meetings. It's not just about more data is better. I mean, I certainly don't want to just paint that picture. It's the right data. So there's been plenty of times where we'll be looking at something and it just turns out it's not really moving the needle at all, right? So we shouldn't necessarily spend so much time trying to collect and interpret the data. there are other things that do seem to move the needle more. When I say the needle, I mean things like, retention and employee engagement feedback and things like that, that are meaningful, right? So having that input from them on, what their people are saying, because HR can't be everywhere at once, has really helped to refine what we look at and how we move forward.
All right, thank you. So what I'd like to do is give Jody a chance to respond to essentially the same question I asked Jeff. We've heard from him regarding the things he does in his role at Kitware to be an impactful business partner on his executive team. Jody, could you do the same? Can you share some additional things you might be doing to provide strategic business improvement value and be a real business partner to your executive team at Healthy Alliance?
Yeah. I was really excited to hear what Jeff does, because that's a lot of what I do and I feel is important as well. And, as he was talking, I was writing down a couple of things because as a leader, as a functional leader of HR, working with an executive team, what I have experienced is, what Jeff had said. Number one, you have to build trust. Right? At the beginning, they're going to tell you everything, right? Because they don't know what you're going to be able to deliver to them. And they're not that they don't trust you, but they just don't know, right? It's an unknown. Right. And so from my experience, the way that I have built trust in the past, and it's what I'm currently doing right now at Healthy Alliance, right? I have been with them as a consultant for a short time. And then just in April, I joined as their VP of HR. And so I'm in that trust building phase. And so what I have to do really right now is deliver, right? I have to be able to deliver on what I say. I have to have credibility. I have to build that credibility, and I have to be the solutions provider. So I have to do all those things to build the trust. And from my experience in my consulting business, working with executives, it's just the everyday coming back with, and I'll kind of go through, what I do, but it's coming back with having those solutions, building that credibility, and the trust develops. And then it's amazing the relationship that you have and how you can help impact the business. So I agree with him 1000%. So some of the things that I do, number one, I learn the business. I have to understand what the business does. What do the employees do? How do they build revenue? How do the teams work together? What goes into that? That will help me understand if we need to focus on leadership development. What's going to have the most impact in this organization based on what they do and how they work together? What's not going to work? What's going to be a waste of time? That's the last thing I would want to do, is to come up with something that's a waste of time. And also, by knowing the business and understanding the priorities of the organization, that helps me know, okay, this is when I need to announce this or suggest this. Right? Or this is when I hold this back. So learning the business, getting the employees to know me. And I've worked with organizations who don't want someone at that level to have a connection with the employees, because it's a strategic position. I'm excited at Healthy Alliance because they want to have that connection. They really care about what the employees think. And when they're coming up with things for the business, or if they're looking at business priorities, the executive team at Healthy Alliance really does think about, okay, how's this going to impact our team? What do we have to be aware of? I love that about this organization. So learning the business is one thing. Providing people perspective at executive team meetings is another thing that I do. Fortunately, at Healthy Alliance, that is top of the list. That is something that we talk about. But what I do is listen. I listen to what's going on. A lot of the business things, that's not something that I can add input to, like a project or a partner thing. That's not my area of expertise. But I listen to everything and think about, as an employee or as people overall, how is that going to have an impact? Or what can we do to prepare the employees to be able to successfully achieve this? So I'm always thinking about things like that. And I can only do that if I'm listening in those meetings. Also, by understanding the business, understanding the staff, when I'm hearing about these initiatives or projects or something that the executive team wants to do, I can start thinking about, okay, what is the skill level in this department? Are these areas that we might need to focus on to help be successful with this initiative? So again, just kind of like, my mind's like a hamster wheel. I'm sure just like Jeff, it's like all these things are going through our head. How can we support that? How can we be there to get ahead of it so we're prepared? And then the third thing, and something that Jeff had said, is being a resource. I was never great in school. However, as an adult learner, HR is the thing that I love. I can listen to podcasts, I can watch webinars, I can read books. I eat it up. I love it. And so that's another way that I can provide that strategic support, is be a resource. If they are having challenges with employee engagement, awesome, here's some ideas. What if we start with something like this and be able to provide these solutions to them on various things, or to support, to develop our HR function to be able to support things like that, to execute on the vision of the CEO or whatever functional leader that they have for their org. And then the fourth thing is just what Jeff had said, and that is metrics. And he is so right that at the very beginning, the executive team tells you what they want to see. But at the same time, you can start monitoring things, maybe not always telling them what you're monitoring, but kind of monitoring that and show them, okay, over the last year, this is something that I've watched, and here's the trend. If you're thinking about the strategy for the following year, what if we try X, Y, or Z? And I've experienced where once you've done this enough and you've shown the benefit of having this data, because I've worked with executives who are very data driven in technical environments. And I've also learned that the more data you can show them, and also the calculations, from experience, slap that calculation up there, it's going to speak to them. And again, that's knowing your partners. But they really get into it. They love being able to see the trend. They love being able to see what's happened and kind of pinpointing, oh, that's when we did this. This is the impact that it had. Or if you can try, and return on investment has always been tough for me, Jeff. I don't know about your experience, but like return on investment for training initiatives, that's always been a challenge for me to try and calculate that. But the more that I can do that and provide that kind of data, those are the things that I try and do. So I think I covered all of them.
All right, thank you. So there's a couple other things I'd like Jody and Jeff to weigh in on, but I was remiss in not promoting Healthy Alliance a little bit and the great culture they've built. Just like Kitware, they've been a best places to work from the Albany Business Review for 3 years, and a couple of years for 21, 22 with Modern Healthcare's best places to work. So congratulations to you as well, and both of you.
And I think we just won 23 Modern Healthcare best place.
Okay, well,
that was just announced this week.
Well done. So one thing I want to bring into the table now is like a couple of weeks ago, Rachel and I were at the Capital Region HR Association conference at the Hilton Garden Inn in Troy. And I had the privilege to speak about building your people development plan. And one thing that I shared that got quite a kind of a vivid response from the room was suggesting that people development isn't just an HR function, and too often organizations see it that way. We talked about engaging your whole in the entire executive team in what does our organization look like in the future? What kind of people need to fill those roles? Where would we find them? How would we attract them? Far too often in the past, this has just been an HR thing. And that's no longer the case for the companies who are doing the best. The entire executive team is getting involved in thinking about people. It might be facilitated by the senior leader from HR, but when it's done best is when the entire executive team is engaged in that thinking, that designing, that planning. And I wanted to get both of your thoughts on that. Is that something that resonates with the two of you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's not a new issue, I don't think. But I was also thinking, as Jody was responding to, about connecting to the business and understanding the business, and I think there's a connection between that idea and what you were just bringing up, Bruce, is engaging the rest of the organization in people management and people issues. And for my 2 cents, I mean, I think the idea that has or the approach that has worked for me is meeting people halfway, right? And what I mean is, getting to know your business so you can speak their language, so that when you interject, ideas or suggestions or requests for help on the people side of it, there's a direct connection that you can articulate between what you're doing and what keeps them up at night, right? And so some things that may seem pretty obvious, but I think are also easy to not have the time for, is learning about your business, right? And I do mean specific things like sitting down with your director of finance or your controller or your CFO or whatever, and walking through the balance sheet of your organization, what literally affects the bottom line. Sitting down with the most senior leader that you can, CEO probably, and what is their vision for going forward, and taking that and saying, okay, well, if that's what we want to do, here's how the people aspect of our business needs to align with that, right? So as opposed to coming from, this is just what I think is a good idea, we just need to train more people, or we need to hire more people, or whatever. It's connecting it to the purpose that and the goals that those other senior leaders worry about, right, and strive for, and connecting that up, right? So when again, all of this stuff that we talk about is probably goes without saying, but is all easier said than done, right? And I think if our conversation gets into the priorities aspect, we can certainly speak to that as well. But to me, I think especially for newer leaders or new people to an organization, how does your organization make money or otherwise, fulfill its mission if it's a nonprofit? And how do people contribute to that? And then drawing that connection to what you do as an HR department. I know, Jody, if you have kind of similar impressions, but
Yeah, I
that's where
loved
my
your
mind went to.
yeah, I loved your connection when you're talking about, how to connect what you're doing with the business and all of that. I really love that. And something that I talk to my team a lot about is partner, right? HR is not a silo. We're a partner. We're a partner to the business, and we don't dictate. We have to, communicate and collaborate because we're all here for one reason, and that's for the success of this organization. We just all happen to be able to grow and improve ourselves in the process. In addition to what Jeff had said, something that I think is important is having a toolbox for the leader to be able to respond to things, because everything is different, right? And how you respond to one thing could be different to how you respond to another. Sometimes, something that I've always loved is situational leadership. If that's a book that you've read, you'll be familiar with it, and you flex based on who you're talking to and what you're talking about. And I kind of think of that as well. Sometimes you have to tell someone, well, this is what we need to do. And in other situations, it could be, we were talking earlier, it could be you have to be curious about it, right? If it's a conflict situation, or if it's an employee coming to you about a challenge that they're having, rather than trying to solve the problem right away, be curious and ask questions and understand, because sometimes you have an answer, sometimes you don't. But if you're just trying to understand and you listen, that could be one way. So anyway, as you were talking, I was thinking there could be multiple ways to handle these things. And one way would be to ensure that our leaders have the tools that they need to be able to handle it on their own before they have to come and to HR for assistance.
Yeah, that's a great point. We were talking offline, right, about trust. And, we want the leaders to, trust in us as HR professionals. but at the same time, be able to trust them, even, down to line managers and so forth, with the people management side, and I think, and I know I'm obviously speaking a lot from my own experience, but I think there, is a lot of times a hesitation with HR professionals to give away some of that trust, right? Because then you think, well, if things go sideways, I'm going to be the one doing the cleanup here. So as issues come up, just come to me. I'll just do it. I'll handle it, right? And there are obviously a lot of things that do need to loop in HR, but I totally agree that a lot of being able to get some of that stuff off our plate is building the tools and putting the training in place that covers, here's what you can handle, here's where we need to be brought in, and here's where we're going to take over and drive the boat a little bit. And yeah, so I think that's spot on to be able to build that trust that goes both ways.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, think about the effectiveness of a team when they learn those skills, right? When they get out of their comfort zone. And I've seen this so many times, and I really believe it, that when you are in the middle of something that's really challenging and you are about to give up, that's the moment when you grow. And so if you think about what you had just said, Jeff, about teaching the leaders to be able to do this on their own, think about the effectiveness of that team, right? Because their skills just grew, and the ability to do more, to take on more, to be successful, things like that. That, I don't know, that's exciting to me to kind of see that, because I've seen that growth in teams, and it's really amazing to see that.
Yeah, same. Certainly makes your day a little easier too when I can teach you this. Don't worry.
Right.
And how to handle
You
this.
can do it.
And then how to bring me in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always a bit of a moving target, right? When we talk about people issues, it's again not normally a black and white situation. So there are going to be certain triggers that you want to make sure that you're involved in. But one other concept too that I was thinking about when you were speaking, and especially about books to read is, and one that very short one that I read many years ago was called QBQ, which is the question behind the question. And the general idea is it was more geared towards training of customer service, personnel, and you may, in the thesis of it, if you will, is that just because you're presented with a problem or presented with a question isn't necessarily the one that you should be tackling, right? And in HR, the prime example that you usually hear is a manager or leader comes to you and says, "We need more training." People don't know what they're supposed to know, and they're not doing their job because they need more training. And it's like, a lot of, especially novice, HR folks might, run off in that direction because that's the problem that they were presented with. But over time, I think you learn to ask the question behind the question, which is, okay, the point is that goals of the organization aren't being met, whatever it is, operational, financial, or whatever. There may be other reasons for that than the one that people initially jump to. So part of bringing your expertise to the table is saying, all right, maybe it's training, or maybe it's a performance management issue, or maybe it's a number of other things, right? And not that you have to blow it all up every time somebody brings you a question, but just take a pause, take a minute, right? Especially on the day-to-day, this employee's not doing their job. Well, who knows what the reason is? Let's look into it. Rather than possibly run off in the wrong direction because that's what you think is happening. So take a breath, right? And because that's the other side. So we're so eager to be responsive and contributing and all that we sometimes fall into that trap of, oh, you gave me a problem, okay, that's what I'll answer for you, instead of saying, wait, let's analyze what really is going on here first.
Yeah.
All right, good. One thing I'd like to do is we're going to go to the Q&A session here in just a minute, but I would like to reinforce what Jody and Jeff were just saying. And we have an HR executive peer group at MPI, and yesterday in our peer advisory conversation, this subject came up just spontaneously, and we had a very rich conversation about it. And when I mean that by this subject is, the prevalence today, unfortunately, with too many issues being quote unquote punted to HR. And, people just, leaders are either not being capable of, willing to have expertise in managing people issues or problems that are manageable and coachable at their level instead of just dumping it on HR. And it can be one of the biggest obstacles to HR leaders having time to be strategic. If they're spending a lot of time solving problems that could be solved at a lower level, or at a different level by other than HR, HR could be more strategic, more of a business partner, working more on business improvement. And unfortunately, and I'm a boomer, and I can tell you throughout my entire career, that was the go-to. Is if you had any kind of people issue, you just said, "Oh, go to HR," and you just hand it over, and then you absolve yourself of fixing it, which isn't a healthy thing to do. And we had a very rich conversation in our peer group about this and how prevalent it was in kind of, preventing HR leaders from spending time working on the business instead of in the business. And I just wanted to reinforce what the two of you were saying, and say it is a very prevalent problem. And we encourage all of you, in the audience here who are HR professionals to consider what can you do to start, politely and respectfully and compassionately pushing back when a problem is brought to you that really could be solved at the leader level, and don't and tolerate less people throwing the monkey on your back when it really could be discussed and resolved at the line leader level. That this leads to a healthier environment overall. So just wanted to, share that because it reinforces what the two of you were just talking about.
Could I add something to that?
Sure.
I think for anyone who is at our level dealing with things like this, I think one thing that is really critical to be able to be successful with what you had just mentioned is to have that executive champion who is going to back you up and say, absolutely, this is the way we're going to go. Because I think all of us on the call have experienced at some point in time when we see this is the right path to go, but then you've got the executive saying, no, listen, you got to focus on that. Don't worry about the people thing. HR will handle it.
Yeah.
At least
Yeah.
I've experienced that. And so being in HR, it is a really gray area. And all of us on this call have gotten really good at maneuvering through, I always say Jello, right? It's like we're trying to maneuver through Jello. But that's one thing that I've really experienced at Healthy Alliances. I do have an executive champion who says, yes, this is what we're going to do. So that makes it easier. I just want to throw that.
That's a really good point. I mean, that shouldn't be overlooked is having, the backing, right? So, because, we talk about a lot of high level stuff and that's great. But it all comes down to day-to-day stuff too, right? And how that all, from the bottom up impacts your position and your success and your day. So yes, I mean, again, it may be different people depending on where you are and what kind of, what level you're at and so forth. It could be a senior manager, it could be the CEO. I mean, who knows? But yes, having somebody that has your back, because when the rubber meets the road and you're trying to get, that people training done, or you're trying to, make sure people are on the same page with, the expectations of what is one person's responsibility versus another. You don't want to necessarily be floundering or, end up saying something that, their senior leader, like you just said, Jody, right, is, don't ignore that. You're fine. But one thing that I was also thinking about is, how do you actually do it, right? If you're currently in a position out there of, hey, all the people stuff just gets dumped on me, and then, they expect me to let them know when it's all fixed, is, to try to have some overlap, right? So, it's not necessarily a, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to train you and you're going to do it. If, for example, it's a performance management issue or something like that, is, okay, let's meet together with the person. I'll show you what I do and how I kind of navigate this, and, it's kind of, it's role playing, but it's real, you know what I mean? And, And, you know, it may take a few times, but, I think a lot of the hesitation, if I had to, guess at people's motivations a little bit of why people, dump the things on HR is they don't feel confident and competent in how to do it. And they're used to, I'll put it over here to HR and then magically it's fixed by the next week. And, but it's also a little bit of pulling back the curtain, right? Is that, having these discussions isn't that hard. You can do it too, kind of thing. And they just need to maybe see that in action sometimes,
Right.
to have a bit of confidence to be able to handle some things on their own.
Love that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Jeff. So that's great feedback. So what we'd like to do now is answer a few of the questions that may have surfaced during the webinar. And Rachel, you've been monitoring those. Can you share one of the questions that surfaced?
Yeah, so the first one here is just a comment that I'll share. Someone typed, I have started holding quarterly training for managers and asking them what tools they would like training on, pushing back to them and talking through solutions so they confront frontline issues with employees. One good question that we got was around, Jody, you talked a lot about this, building trust. A lot of our conversation has been focused on more senior leaders, but what advice would you give to maybe somebody who is reporting up to, say, the head of HR in their organization or a member of the executive team to, build trust with their supervisor, maybe, other of their colleagues in the organization who might not be at that senior level to start making a change?
So the question is, what did they do? So if they report up to a senior HR leader, what do they do? That's a great question. I think number one is understanding what's expected of them from their leader. And once so I'm thinking of myself, once I know what I'm expected to do, then I'm going to go out and create plans and go back to that leader and say, these are the things that I'm thinking about. This is how I see it adding value to the organization. And this is the challenge that I think it addresses. What do you think? And then start to go that way. And honestly, whatever position you're in, the way I look at it, think of myself. Number one, I need to listen. Number two, I need to provide solutions and create action plans and get results. And the whole time I'm doing that, I'm communicating. Am I on track? What do I need to change? Do I need to pivot? And just start that way. I look at it like a flight of stairs, right? Just take the first step, get that done, and go to the next step.
Jeff, any
Agreed.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a position where, you're reporting up to a senior HR person, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we talked about with, creating that trust and reliance between the senior HR person and the executive team applies in this situation too. So my advice is, with your HR leader is, to try to make sure as best as possible that you're on the same page of where your flexibility and where your responsibility and where your authority lies, right? And so just to maybe put out as an example, if you're a talent acquisition person and you're meeting with hiring managers and they say they, want to do this or that, or post this position or not post that one, or this is how we want to screen candidates, and you're like, I don't know if that's going to fly. Hopefully you have kind of procedure already written out that you can refer to, but if you don't, you want to know that your HR leader, again, has your back, right? And so having that dialogue with them of, if it starts getting into this gray territory and you're not there, what are you comfortable with me, kind of putting out there as what we should do, you hopefully will be in a better place. And then if, the hiring manager, whoever is kind of questioning that more, procedure of how we do things, that, can more be taken up with the HR leader, right? But you got to know where you stand. And where you can, not only for things that you might, disagree on with, a hiring manager, so forth, but, things that you can also suggest to do, right? And so from a day-to-day perspective, have those regular meetings with your manager, make sure they're in the loop of what you're facing and what's going on, and try to kind of head it off too. So if this comes up, am I okay saying that, right? And that way, if it flies, great. If not, somebody higher up will defend you, right?
Mm-hmm. So this next question we have is from something that you had shared earlier, Jeff, about creating your HR strategic plan. You had mentioned, Kitware has their, company strategic plan, and then you kind of take that and make your own for HR. So can you just elaborate on that a little bit? What maybe differs in that plan that isn't included in the overall company plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just more, think of it as kind of one level down, right, from the overall business strategic plan. So if the overall business one is, we want to, what do you typically see things in, right? We want to grow revenue by this. We want to expand our geographic footprint by that, right? Some things that you might see in there. Then the HR strategic plan piece of it will be, how are we going to deliver on that, right? So it could be anything from, we're doing an analysis of the labor market. You want to put a new plant or office in this area. What does the local workforce look like? How are we going to, execute on our talent acquisition timeline? And it's a back and forth, right? So, I mean, you may have a strategic plan at the company level, but when you get down to the HR side of it, it may not be feasible, right? So again, some other examples that have come up with us are we needed to expand our talent acquisition footprint, right? Because it's really hard to find qualified software developers with the scientific domain knowledge that we need. So we're expanding. Okay, so that people, from anywhere, apply in the U.S. How are we going to be able to accommodate that? Does that mean, getting involved into new states for labor regulations and having employees there? Is it, developing hybrid work policies and procedures that help keep us feeling like one company and getting work done? Those are just things, for example, that would fall under, I think, an HR strategic plan that then flows down into the tactical stuff, right? We're going to look up these new state regulations. We're going to head off any potential issues between what states require and how our payroll process works or whatever, right? That's more of what I'm talking about of how this actually comes out in day-to-day life, is, the HR expertise applied to fulfilling the business plan.
Jody, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking as well. And it can also include, do you need to retool the foundation of the HR function, to meet those milestones, to meet those objectives. So it can be a number of things. It could also be, in addition to the revenue, which is usually always something a part of that, if that's part of your organization. It's also, what's the people vision of the CEO? What do they see? Is that all? Does that also include culture? And do you need to come up with some initiatives to have a positive impact on that? So it can be a number of things, just like Jeff said, you're taking what the business strategy is or the objectives, and then you're coming up with, okay, how from a people function can we help to make that successful?
Mm-hmm. So this last one is just my own personal question that I'm interested to hear from both of you, which is we've spent the last hour talking about like a lot of really good big ideas. And we keep kind of coming back to the fact that, these all sound really good, but then it's actually about like the doing, right? And like implementing and delivering on what we're talking about. So how do both of you, especially just given the seniority that you both hold in your organizations, actually make the time to think about these activities and then implement on them, because they are outside of, sort of your day-to-day more tactical work?
In 1 minute or less.
Sorry, Bruce, I had to squeeze it in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean, what we're really talking about is time management, right? And how do you juggle the day-to-day tactical things and the high-level strategic things, and what do you do this morning versus this afternoon and next week versus today, and all that stuff. And Yeah, in a minute or less, it's you know, yeah, it's possible. But I would encourage people, if they haven't already, to research time management techniques. Right? I mean, it seems like an old topic to keep coming back to, but it's obviously still important. One resource that I'll put out there is if you look on YouTube for a time management video done by man named Randy Pausch, who some of you may remember from years ago, delivered what was called The Last Lecture, right? And but he did another one after that, all about time management, and it's just fantastic. But one quick trick, I guess, is block off your time, because if your calendar's wide open, you'll feel that you're just pulled in 17 different directions and answering the email that comes in right now and all that. So one thing, if I'm like, well, how do I actually make an HR strategic plan? When am I going to find the time to do that? Block off your time for 2 hours here and there and just focus on that, right? Or if there's multiple things that are priorities, dive into one for an hour, stop, move on to the next one for an hour, and then that's what you focus on. And it obviously easier said than done, and we're all in different types of environments, but being conscious about that and conscious about your time is, the biggest piece, in my opinion.
So I have three things. One, delegate what you can. Two, don't sign up for meetings that you can do through email. So if it's not value add and you can get out of it, don't go, and don't apologize for not going, because you have other important things to do. And then the third thing is kind of what Jeff just said. Focus on it in little steps, like do a little bit here and there, and eventually it's like a snowball. You'll eventually get to the end.
Well said.
That was great. So those of you on the call who've gone through a time management workshop from MPI, you just got most of the essential elements we delivered. So in the words of Adam Grant, I'd like to do a quick lightning round. So in like 15 seconds or less, top of mind, what's one of the biggest insights you gained from this conversation together? Jeff, could you start?
Oh gosh, what's the biggest insight that I gathered? I would say that, the common things that I think I have faced in my career are still being faced by other HR professionals. And this is a prime example of how to navigate and get through that, is doing things like this, networking with fellow professionals, tapping into the kind of HR group mind. And because people have figured this out, you're not alone, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel either.
Yeah, good. Jody?
I was going to say the same thing. Just remember, you're not alone. Everyone in our positions, all of you on the call, you're all going through the same thing, so you're not alone. So take action, listen, and connect with your colleagues, and ask for help.
Rachel?
I'm going to say the data piece. Bruce, I've heard you say, a number of times, just being your colleague and sitting in on sessions like this, the two main resources businesses have are people and money. And the first time I heard that, it just sort of stuck with me. I had never heard it framed that way, but, both Jeff and Jody placed a really large emphasis on, data and analytics, and, HR is a business function, just like operations and marketing and all of the other departments in your organization, and just placing that emphasis on having, internal, external data, understanding that, and then using that in a strategic way.
Nice.
And I will add that I think that what I want to encourage all of you on the call here is to find colleagues that you can have your own peer advisory group where you can talk about stuff like this, because as Jody and Jeff said, you're facing the same stuff. And you can do it in a formal setting like we do at MPI. We have organizational leader peer groups, we have marketing leader peer groups, we have HR leader peer groups. But be the one who chooses to reach out to others and that that are in your field, and say, let's have a group together and let's get together once a month. And because there's probably lots of things you can learn from each other. I think you can get value just from commiserating with each other. But with that being said, I think we're kind of up on our time. I want to thank all of you for joining. And we have one last slide to look at, right, Rachel? Let's stay connected. So keep an eye out for other webinars. We try to do one of these just about once a quarter. And a little bit of self-promotion here. We want to encourage all of you to be thinking about our leadership programs that kick off again in September. We have personal leadership, team leadership, and organizational leadership. And in the public setting, it's got a great price point, and those programs are very well liked by people who choose to participate. So thanks again to everybody for joining us and choosing to participate today. It's admirable when you choose to participate in things like this. It's continuous learning and just getting some good ideas from your colleagues. But otherwise, we wish you all a very great weekend. And if we don't see you otherwise, have a great summer. Rachel, anything else?
No, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody. Bye.